And a very good evening to you. Welcome to Politics 101 on a Tuesday evening. I say evening because we are going by a Guyana time. So it's evening in Guyana. It's 7 o'clock in Guyana. Good evening to you if you're joining us from Guyana and the wider Caribbean. And of course, on the East Coast, if you're on the East Coast of the United States, it's still evening there, 6 o'clock there on the East Coast. If you're joining us from the West Coast, it's 4 o'clock where I am in Arizona, 4 o'clock. Good afternoon to you if you're joining us from the West Coast of the United States of America. Good evening, the Caribbean to Politics 101. As we indicated, it's Tuesday evening, and it's the Tuesday evening's edition of our program. I trust that you all have had quite a productive and political weekend. Lots happening in Guyana and the world. They are in Parliament considering the estimates of the budget as we speak. The budget debates, of course, lasted 1 week, and people are questioning whether, in fact, it was a debate or they were just quarreling with each other, you know, insulting each other there and so on. But the budget, of course, is very important, as we've been saying here. I'll try to see if I get a couple of people from the Parliament there. They've been getting ample coverage, both sides, from the two independent newspapers, the Kaitro News and the Stabroek News. I don't think the opposition could complain about the coverage they've been getting from those two newspapers. I think that is quite an improvement. But that budget is going to have consequences beyond where we are today. And we are going to continue to follow that budget because that budget says a lot about what the intentions of the PPP government are. It says a lot about their attitude to social class, about their attitude to race, about their attitude to the accumulation of wealth, about their attitude to the oil money. It says a lot. And so the budget would be passed because the government is going to use its majority to pass the budget. And so it's going to pass unless somebody do a charandas on the PPP, and it will take two of them because, of course, there is the one drawing the seat that is being held by Mr. Schuman. So it will take Mr. Schuman and a PPP charandas for the budget not to pass. So they're going to pass it. And therein lies the problem, because they did not consult with the opposition before they craft the budget. They will not take on board the recommendations of the opposition in Parliament. So it's their budget. Even the private sector, which is hailing the budget, I've been reliably informed that the private sector gave recommendations of what it would like to see in the budget, and only less than 10% of what the private sector said or recommended found its way into the budget. Yet we hear the private sector commission and others are saying, others of that class, they're saying that they think there is something in the budget for everybody, but only, less than 10% of their recommendations, I understand, made it into the budget. So they're saying what a wonderful budget it is, but their recommendations didn't make it into that budget. So this is a Freedom House budget. It's a Freedom House budget. So much for democracy, but we're going to be talking more about that. Welcome to Politics 101. I want to thank all of you for coming through. I noticed welcome to Yvonne Rodriguez she's joining us from Barbados. And I'm wondering, I used to have a neighbor who I also taught, who I know has migrated to Barbados. And I know Ms. Rodriguez, and I'm trying to remember whether it's Yvonne. And if you are Yvonne, my God, it's been years, a lot of years. Welcome to Politics 101. I remember well, if you're the same Yvonne, we used to call you Mandy Rodriguez. But you know, all of us have these 2 and 3 names. And sometimes you know a person by one name, and then you realize they got another name. Some people in villages, you know them by default, so you never know their real name. Good evening to you, Yvonne, if you're joining us. And you said you're joining us from Barbados, and I am it's my neighbor and former neighbor and former student. I notice Daniel Booker. You can't hide as my friend. Welcome to Politics 101. We are going to go through some changes. We're adding a Friday edition to Politics 101. A Friday edition, and that Friday edition is going to be called Black Matters. On that Friday edition, starting this Friday, we are going to dedicate that show specifically to matters having to do with African Guyanese, with Black people. And we're calling that Friday edition of Politics 101 Black Matters. We know of Black Lives Matter, and we are going to call our show Blacks Matter, or Black Matters. Black Matters. Black Matters meaning that Blackness and Black people matter. It also means that we're going to be dealing with issues that have to do with Black people. So we are playing on the word matter. Black Matters. Black Matters. Debuting on Friday, same time at 7 p.m. That is going to be our Friday edition of Politics 101. So please put that on your calendar. Yes, Dr. Hinds. It's the same Yvonne. How are you doing? How are you doing? I'm glad that my memory is on, and it's always good. You know very well, and you haven't seen them or heard from them in years. I'm talking, I have not seen you, my sister, in wow, more than 30 years. But it's good to know that I knew you had migrated to Barbados, and it's so wonderful to know that you are there and you're on Politics 101. Wonderful. Tonight we are going to be talking about this issue with IDPADA-G. You remember 2 weeks ago we had Vincent Alexander on, and he was talking about the court case that IDPADA-G had brought against the government. You know, the government had taken away the subvention from IDPADA-G. This is money that was passed in the budget. They've taken it away from IDPADA-G. IDPADA-G, among other things, went to court to challenge it. And one of the attorneys in that case, Mr. Vivian Williams, Dr. Vivian Williams, some of you will remember him. Well, he used to be in another life, in a former life, he was a journalist. I think it was on Channel 28, the old Vera station. I think he worked there. I may be wrong, but he has since become an attorney at law. And he is one of the lawyers in this case that is brought by IDPADA. And he is going to be here with us. In fact, he's already in the studio, and he's going to talk us through, bring us up to date with the case, what the issues are, what is the background to the case, where the case is at the moment, so that we can be informed about what is going on. Because that's what we try to do on our programs. We try to bring you information. We try to bring you analysis where it's necessary. And we also, in the process, mobilize you, because people cannot be mobilized if they're not informed. And so we bring you information. We bring you analysis. We learn from you. That is why your comments are extremely important. Welcome to Politics 101. Good evening, Sandra Hanover. Good evening, Thomasina Ben Lambert. Good evening, Anne-Marie Selby. She's a regular. Gloria Fraser. Good evening. Annette Cummins. Good evening to you. We sometimes don't get to everybody, but we want you to know that you're all part of this family. Welcome to Politics 101. We come on air tonight. I want to say happy birthday to my colleague, my leader, Rupert Roepnerine, Dr. Rupert Roepnerine. Today turned 80. Dr. Rupert Roepnerine turned 80 today. Happy birthday to you, my brother, Dr. Roepnerine. As you know, former education minister, former co-leader of the WPA, one of my mentors, one of the persons who influenced me tremendously, a real giant of a person. And when you talk about multiracial and when you talk about non-racial, Rupert Roepnerine, sometimes we forget that he is Indian. He's comfortable. One of the few Indian leaders, public people, who's comfortable with Black people. And I know those of you from Buxton, Yvonne's generation would know Dr. Roepnerine as children. As I said, Yvonne was my neighbor. You know, Dr. Roepnerine frequented Buxton, frequented our home, and he is always fond of reminding me of the many godchildren he has in Buxton and other African Guyanese villages. Happy birthday, happy 80th birthday. You know, 80, which means you're batting well, because the Bible said 70. So you've gone 70 plus 10. Happy birthday, my brother. We are going to do a show on Dr. Roepnerine, a podcast, and you're going to know when that podcast will be aired. We are trying to air the podcast on Sunday nights. The podcast is called The Open Word. The Open Word. Open Word used to be a newspaper published by the WPA in the 1980s. And so Politics 101 is starting a podcast where we're going to get below the surface with issues, and we're going to air that podcast on Sunday night. So we are expanding, as we promise you. We have the African Guyanese program on Friday nights, Black Matters, and our podcast will be aired on Sunday night. So we are expanding. We are trying to meet as broad an audience as possible. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. We're going to be talking about that IDPADA-G case with Dr. Vivian Williams. Please share the link and let everyone know that Politics 101 is on. We come on air tonight. We celebrate Dr. Roepnerine's 80th birthday. But one of Dr. Roepnerine's colleagues, I think they all were at QC together, Dr. Gordon Rollier, the preeminent expert on Calypso in the academy. Dr. Rollier taught for over 40 years at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad, where he has been living since the 1960s. And he passed away age 80. He and Dr. Rup Ryan and Dr. Roddy, they were all at QC together. And a giant of a scholar, someone who has influenced my own scholarship on calypso and reggae. I remember as a boy hearing him on the radio. It must have been around 1971, 72. And I heard him on the radio talking about the calypsos of the Mighty Sparrow and tracing the development of politics in Trinidad from 1956 using the calypso of Mighty Sparrow. And I was mesmerized by that. I grew up near a rum shop, so I was always hearing calypso. And the rum shop would play what you call the smutty calypsos and so on. And here I was hearing this social commentary and political commentary, and Dr. Roller analyzing it, and I fell in love with that kind of thing. And so today I teach. I teach calypso, music as political discourse, calypso, reggae, and hip hop. And I was influenced a lot by Dr. Roller. And he died on Sunday at age 80. The Academy and Guyana's lost a tremendous resource. Dr. Gordon Roller, dead at 80. What a season. So many of our people are dying every day. Souls are passing away. You know, it has always been so, but apparently, you know, now as we grow older, we are becoming much more conscious of it. Welcome to Politics 101. I think it's time that we get ready and start with our interview. Good evening, Dr. Williams.
Good evening, Dr. Hinds. Thank you very much for having me. Good evening. Good evening also to your viewers, many of whom are with you week after week.
Thank you. And was I wrong in remembering that you were once a journalist?
Well, you weren't. I actually was a journalist. I worked, as you indicated, at Evening News, and I think my last position there was as the editor-in-chief before I departed.
So tell me something. What inspired you to move from journalism to becoming a lawyer?
Well, life is a journey, and sometimes that journey is informed by a perspective that finds its way moving through different milestones and different curves and bends and turns, but furthering sometimes the same goal. As a journalist, you're a servant of the people. It becomes part of what you're concerned about is things like giving voice to people, recognizing injustice in a society, and pursuing those issues. But there come a point in time when sometimes you recognize that you could be that advocate, because journalists are also advocates. They're advocates for the people, and they also are advocates for accountability and transparency and all of that. But sometimes you recognize that you could perform that function in a different way, and law is another very good way to be an advocate and a voice for the voiceless. So I think it was a natural progression from one thing to another.
Wonderful. And how well, you've hinted there, because I'm about to ask, how does your experience as a journalist help in your work as a lawyer now?
Well, justice requires a perspective. It requires an understanding of the people you serve, the circumstances under which they come to you, and a, a, a solid understanding of the institutional mechanisms that affect people. And journalism is sort of provide that kind of solid foundation that helps you to understand the interaction between individuals at a private level. That would be individuals and individuals, individuals and entities such as corporate entities. And law is a lot about that interaction between people and people and people and corporate entities, and the interaction between people, corporate entities, and institutions such as government agencies. And I think that uh, journalism provides that good perspective, and a lawyer takes that to another step, because the journalist is merely reporting what he or she sees or discovers, and as an advocate in the capacity of an attorney, you are sort of engaged in addressing those and remedying some of the problems that the journalist might report on.
Wonderful. Are you in private practice?
Yes, I am.
And you're practicing out of New York, no?
Well, I practice in New York, but I also am admitted in Guyana and Trinidad. So I also am extended in the Caribbean. I like to see my practice as sort of more global than sort of local in its scope. And that has been my focus. I think transactions between people and businesses, and businesses and state, have moved beyond localization into more national and global arena, and the law is has progressed in that direction to take into consideration the sort of interaction and problems that occur across border. And as attorneys now, it is not really the best thing to limit your vision and limit your involvement to a specific local environment, because even transactions within your local environment will have an international dimension.
In case you're just joining us, and we are talking with attorney at law, Mr. Dr. Vivian M. Williams, who is an attorney on the case involving IDPADA-G and the government. That case was brought by IDPADA-G after the government, as you know, removed the subvention, or discontinued the subvention to IDPADA-G. And Dr. Williams would be talking to us about that. Is there any particular aspect of the law that you are, just in case there are members of our audience who are in New York and of course in Guyana, and may have uses for your services? You know, I remember when I first came to America and lived in Washington, D.C., there were two Guyanese attorney. I know one of them was Mr. Beard. I'm forgetting Dennis Beard, I think was his first name, but Beard, and there was Mayor Robertson. There were two Guyanese attorneys at law, and you know, every case Guyanese people had, they were, you know, well, most cases they would go to Mr. Robertson, Mayor Robertson, who's now in Guyana and involved in some of the cases during the election, and I think Dennis Beard. I think that's what his first name. But now, I mean, there are lots of younger lawyers in the communities now. Plug here and Politics 101. Any law that you specialize in that our people be able to use your services?
Well, I have actually done work in very many areas of the law, but more recently, I have focused my attention more on corporate matters, more complex corporate litigation. And one of the reasons for the focus on uh, corporate work is corporations have emerged as uh, very powerful forces in modern society. In the past, it was government that we wrestled with in order to be able to contain excesses and effects and the problems that people encounter. Corporations have sort of replaced governments in terms of that powerful influence. Even what you see taking place at the level of government is influenced significantly by corporate lobbying and corporate agenda. And so my focus more recently is more complex corporate litigation.
Corporate litigation. So you can, if you have anything to do with corporate law, you can contact Dr. Williams as we continue our interview here on the case brought by IDPADA-G against the government. And please help us, please help us, please help us wish Dr. Rupert Rupnarain happy birthday. He's 80 today. And I'm sure Dr. Rupert Rupnarain needs no introduction to most, if not all of you. Please help us wish a wonderful person, true son of Guyana, patriotic, progressive brother. Happy birthday. Happy 80th birthday, Dr. Rupert Rupnarain. And like I said, we're going to do a full podcast with some of his colleagues talking about his contribution to Guyana and Guyanese society. Dr. Williams, let's go now to the case that brought by IDPADA-G against the government. Give us the background to the case first, and then tell us where we are at the moment in this case.
So the matter is now before the court, and so it is sub judice. I would have to sort of tiptoe in terms of how I address the substantive matter. Be careful not to, one, telegraph what might be the thought process of the attorneys working for IDPADA-G, and also not to get too much into the factual issues. But essentially, what the litigation with IDPADA-G is about, it is really about promises and how rights evolve and accrue from the way individuals and entities interact, make promises, and cause others to have certain expectations. Rights accrue in several ways. What rights may accrue by way of contract. So you may have an oral contract or you may have a written contract. And what happens in contract, one party is actually transferring rights that he or she may have or it may have to another. So that's a sort of an alienation of rights. Rights may also accrue from laws. There might be laws that stipulate and say that you have X or Y rights. But rights may also be alienated and transferred by way of promises and by way of conduct. And promises are really give an indication. The promises and the extent to which promises are kept give an indication of really the state of a society. And in the case of IDPADA-G, the case is built around promises made by the government, conduct by the government that give rise to the accrual of rights that IDPADA-G claims it has, because it created what is recognized in law as a legitimate expectation. And rights may include substantive and procedural rights may evolve or accrue from an express promise made or by a conduct that give rise to an expectation that the law recognizes is a legitimate one. And very often, sometimes people may rely on that expectation, that promise. So when someone relies on the expectation, that person suffers or that entity suffers a detriment. And since from common law, legitimate expectation was recognized as a fundamental aspect of law that really is moored to fundamental rights that people have. The issue of legitimate expectation has been gaining more prominence more recently in the Caribbean jurisdiction. And the Caribbean Court of Justice refers to the concept as really a fluid one that is evolving, and it has set established some precedents with respect to how a legitimate expectation is formed and how a legitimate expectation is enforced. In the case of IDPADA-G, what that case is about the conduct and promises made by the government that give rise to a legitimate expectation. Not only that IDPADA-G is arguing that a legitimate expectation that was created that gave it rights in law, but that the promises and the reliance on those promises also take the shape and form of contract, because IDPADA-G relied on the promises and the commitments made to it, and it suffered a detriment because it extended itself in significant ways in order to fulfill its end of that bargain. So you had an offer, you had an acceptance, and then you had reliance on that. Arising from that would also be constitutional rights, substantive rights. Whenever there is some sort of substantive rights that involve some economic benefit, that has constitutional safeguards and protections. And there is also the other aspect of procedural legitimate expectation and procedural, well, natural justice in the Constitution. That if a substantive right accrues, if the state has uh, caused that legitimate expectation to be created, that substantive legitimate expectation, there must be some procedural steps, even if the state has good basis to terminate the right that it has promised or the benefit that it has promised. There must be some procedural safeguards and procedural steps. In the case of IDPADA-G, that procedural aspect also did not what was IDPADA-G argues that there wasn't that the procedural steps necessary that should have been taken by the state before any termination of the benefit. It argues that there was no basis for termination or suspension of the benefit for the breach of the promise, and that even if there were, that the manner in which was done does not constitute fairness, and that there was a breach of the procedural aspects that should have been procedural processes that should have preceded any action by the government. And these are fundamental principles in law. The state, whenever it confers a benefit, should not abandon procedural aspects before it terminates or cause any sort of um, reduction of that benefit or suspension of the benefit that the person expects. In the case of IDPADA-G, not only was there an expectation, there was substantial reliance and substantial economic extension of the organization that requires a greater procedural steps even before the government took any steps to affect or terminate the benefit. That's really what the case is about. And it is very often, sometimes cases take on some political flavor, but it is really about rights. It's really about individual rights, and it's really about the rights of entities and the rights that individuals and people have against their government, and how governments should treat and respond to their subjects. Essentially, that's really what the case is about, without getting into the specific factual issues.
And I am drawn to your comment that this case is about rights. It's about rights, and I imagine it's about the rights of citizens, the rights of human beings under the Constitution, and in the contractual arrangement between citizens and their government. I mean, their rights that govern those contractual agreements. No? Yes?
I didn't hear the last part. If you could repeat that for me.
The contractual arrangement between the government and the IDPADA-G, that the whole question of rights is central in terms of the contract between government and citizens. No?
It is essential an issue of rights. It is essentially an issue of rights. And what I am pointing out is that rights accrue and form not merely simply by typing something up on a piece of paper and having parties sign it. Even when you have conduct not memorialized in some form of a document and signed by parties, that you could still have rights and commitment and obligations arising from that. And so what the IDPADA-G case about is what standard or standards the government should be held to when it is going back on its word, when it makes promises, makes commitments, and cause subjects of the state to, whether individuals or entities, to rely on those promises. Well, what standards should apply if the state is going to adjust, withdraw, or in any way have it affect those rights? And I should point out that we know that the government had made a lot of, have said a lot about the sanctity of contract, which really is a good thing. Governments really should respect the sanctity of contracts. But and that has to do with the respect for promises and the honoring of promises, obligations and commitments. But you couldn't have a situation where there are promises made to foreign actors, foreign entities, are viewed with this great level of sanctity, but promises made to entities and individuals within a country is viewed as something that you could just simply withdraw without any sort of procedural steps and procedural implication.
And I think that point is very important, because here is the government saying to Exxon, you signed the contract and we respect the sanctity of that contract, and we are not going to interfere with that contract. But here is the government signing a contract with IDPADA-G, the previous government, and this government, this present government, while saying that the contract with Exxon signed by the previous government, we're not interfering with that because we believe in the sanctity of contracts. But when it comes to IDPADA-G, apparently that belief does not exist. And so it is prepared, as it has done, it has, in a sense, walked back on that contract. Double standards, but more importantly, all right, it's an action against a section of your population that didn't vote for you, because IDPADA-G is about African people and the decade of the people of African descent. And as we know in our politics, those people voted for the opposition. They meaning voted for the coalition and not for the people. And the PPP has used its power in government to rescind the contract that it has had with IDPADA-G. This is a serious matter, serious business here we're talking about in our country, Guyana. Dr. Williams, any comment on my observation there? If so, you are free to make your comment. But if not, I want to ask if in your research have you encountered similar cases across the Caribbean?
Well, it depends upon what you mean by similar. If it were similar case in terms of legitimate expectation, yes, there are a number of cases where courts have actually upheld the rights of persons who have had a legitimate expectation, and there are a number of cases even in Guyana. There are cases in Guyana that went up to the CCJ. So legitimate expectation is not something that IDPADA-G is raising for the first time. It is something that is very familiar to the law. It goes way back from the common law. Uh, it has been raising its head more frequently in the Caribbean, and the courts have had to deal with it. Uh, the CCJ in its most recent decision, and that was a 2022 decision, I think it was in June of 2022, that it sort of crystallized the law on legitimate expectation in a more in clearer and more precise ways, and set up clearer standards and clarify certain issues that were still in a fluid state. So there are cases where persons have moved against state entities in Trinidad and in Belize and uh, all over the world. So it is not something that IDPADA-G is raising for the first time. What I'd like to add is that if the government believed that it had strong legal basis for the action it took, one would think that it would be able to quickly and easily defend the action and to file its defense as required. And what actually emerged was that the government struggled to defend uh, its action when IDPADA-G went to court, couldn't file a timely defense, sought to obtain the permission of the court to extend its time, and that application, it stated quite clearly that it was unable to file its defense. It was unable to file its defense, which really is an indication of the strength of the legal position taken by IDPADA-G. Of course, IDPADA-G resisted the attempt to to extend time to serve to file its defense, and on the eve of the hearing scheduled for the 25th, the government, recognizing that its application for extension was really in you know a bad state, rushed to file its defense, and it did file a defense, which was so late that the judge hadn't had time to review the defense filed by the government. No, IDPADA-G, however, the team of attorneys for IDPADA-G, however, reviewed it and found that the defense was so weak that even though we had good cause to resist the court accepting the defense, we were ready to proceed on the 25th and urge the court to um, to move forward with the case as is, with our application, our initial application, and the government's defense, because we were sure that uh, the government would not have been able to satisfy its burden under the law for the action it took. Uh, so that is an indication that when entities and people push back, governments sometimes have to review their action, and I think this is important. Delays in the legal system is an important aspect that I want to park if we have time to return and have a discussion on later on, because that is something that we're having our eyes open, uh, expecting that there might be attempts to go down the road of some delays in this case.
To go down the road of some delays. And I think this is a very important point, Dr. Williams is making here, you all remember the charge that the coalition attempted to rig the election. And then there was the chance to prove that accusation in the court via the petitions. And the PPP and the government have done everything in their power to either delay or to throw those cases. Now, you take away money from IDPADA-G because you claim that they're misusing the money and all that stuff. You have a chance to prove that in the court of law, and you are delaying the same thing. This is a pattern on the part of the government. I want you all, the audience, to hear this. The using the power of government to arrive at conclusions about people. And when you have a chance in the court of law to prove it, they're running and hiding. This is what you're up against with this people, government. So the court is ready. IDPADA-G and the lawyers are ready. And the government is not ready. This is a government that took that action. If you're taking an extreme action like that, breaking a contract, taking away money from an agency that represents half of your population, then it means that you must have had good reason. You should have been ready when the matter is called in court, but you're not ready. It suggests to me that this is spite work on the part of the PPP.
Dr. Hinds,
Dr. Williams.
I want to say a few things about the whole question of delay, which really impact judicial efficiency. So if there is unnecessary delays in the judicial system, it will have an impact on judicial efficiency. When judicial efficiency is impacted, it means that justice is delayed. One of the important aspects of a just society is quick justice. Delay in hearing case and determining case have a similar effect as the prevention of access to the court. It is one thing to have access to the court to be able to file an action in the court, but to be able to see that action go through all of the various stages of the judicial process to finality and to an outcome is really part of access to the court. It is unusual, therefore, for the state to engage in delays. Prosecutors and attorney and you know the in the United States Department of Justice, in countries like Guyana, the Attorney General, they're the ones who usually would push for judicial efficiency and are usually sanctioned in cases where there's unnecessary delay in the process. Delay tactics is not something that usually would come from or should come from the state, because whenever you have an action involving the state, it is really the state against its people, an individual or an entity. And the state really shouldn't use its muscles in the judicial system to affect the hearing and determination of the case. So delays in bringing cases to a conclusion is not something that one would expect that the state should pursue. One would expect that the state would vigorously and aggressively pursue its agenda where it believes that it has a substantive case, a case with merit. what usually happens is if a prosecutor or an attorney general recognizes that the state does not have a case with merit, they move swiftly to dismiss the case, or they move swiftly to reach a negotiated settlement. And so I raise that point to point out that one should not expect that the state should be involved, should be engaging in delay tactics. I am not at this point in time saying that that is what the state is doing, but since we're talking about justice and access to justice, I'm saying that that is something that we have to keep an eye out for, and to ensure. And I would say that as a prosecutor or an attorney general, it is not about winning. It is not about going to the end and prove that you could win a case, whether by creating some sort of procedural innovation. It is about the ends of justice. And so when the state recognizes that it is pursuing a legal matter that lacks merit or that will not have a just outcome, taking to the end, it should swiftly move to dismiss or seek some sort of settlement. And that would help in judicial efficiency rather than simply creating motions, applications after applications, merely for the purpose of pushing the of delaying the determination of the matter.
The voice there of Dr. Vivian Williams, attorney at law. He is working on the IDPADA-G case that was brought against the government of Guyana for discontinuing the subvention that was passed in the national budget for IDPADA-G, walking us through the case and bringing us up to date of where the case is, and also giving us a lesson here on the law as it relates to rights of citizens. Thank you, Dougie, for confirming that it's Dennis Beard, Washington, D.C., Maryland. I remember him quite well. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us this evening and wishing Dr. Rupert Rupnarayan happy birthday, happy 80th birthday. Dr. Rupnarayan is 80 today. And I want to thank you all for the outpouring of love for someone who was given much love to Guyana and much service to our country. I want to also tell those of you who are joining us late that on Friday, we're going to be starting a Friday edition of Politics 101 called Black Matters. Black Matters. We're going to be talking about everything African Guyanese, everything Black. Black matters. Black matters in Guyana, Black matters in the world, and matters concerning Black people are also important. Black Matters, new program on Friday, same time. Please put it on your calendar. Good evening, Albert Morgan. Good evening. How are you? How are you? Black Matters on Friday. Starting on Friday, we're going to be talking about everything Black. You know, imagine Ravi Dev writing in the newspaper yesterday that Aubrey Norton is not talking about race, unlike his erstwhile friends in the WPA who talking about race this and race that. Ravi Dev. If we in the WPA have race on our brains, according to them, well, we learn it from Ravi Dev, who's more race man than Ravi Dev. The point is, when a race man telling you not to talk about race, he got a reason. You see, when power is in the hands of the group that they represent, they don't want to talk about race. When power was in the hands of the coalition, and the coalition was right-sizing the industry, the sugar industry, the olive race. Everything was raised for them. Now that they have power, or their group has power in its hands, they don't want to talk about race. You see the three-card tricksters and tricking, but we got them. We got them. They ain't getting away. They're not getting away. They want Aubrey Norton not to talk about race. But they're not getting away. We're talking about race tonight because we're talking about subvention passed by law, passed by the lawmaking body for IDPADA-G to do work mandated by the United Nations. And they took away that money. They broke that contract with IDPADA-G. They're saying that they can't break a contract with Exxon, but they could break a contract with IDPADA-G. The state can break a contract with Black people. This is not Dr. Williams. This is me, David Hinds. The state can break a contract with Black people, but the same state, the same government can't and afraid to break a contract with Exxon. All you see what we're dealing with in Guyana. This impasse has to stop. One of my mentors in UC Guyana, he said to the British in 1953, all you know, this confounded nonsense must stop. This confounded nonsense has to stop. There is past Black people, but we are fighting back. And IDPADA-G is fighting back in the court of law, in the court of law. And IDPADA-G is ready, ready, ready. Let me go down the road. And the government is running and hiding. It's not I saying so, the attorney saying so. They're not ready. They're seeking to delay killing us softly with hate. Roberta Flack said, killing me softly with love. They're killing us softly with hate. Hate. Bob Marley said, we build your cabins, we plant your corn, we build your penitentiary, and you reward our love with hate. That's what we're dealing with in Guyana. And we're not coming off of them. They want us. They're telling me, Dr. Hinds, talk about neoliberalism. Yes, I'm going to talk about neoliberalism within the context of racial inequality and racial discrimination. Dr. Hinds talk about class. Yes, I'm going to talk about class when we talk about the Black working class and how the Black working class is treated differently from other working classes in Guyana. Ready for them, you know. We are making sport. We are playing. This confounded nonsense must stop. And only we can stop it. And we ought not to let them stop us from stopping it. Black Matters on Friday, we're going to be talking about everything Black. You all notice how quick they charge 5 Black policemen for killing a Black man. No, nothing. Quick. They charge 5 Black policemen. Whenever there were white policemen, they go around the thing. It can't be murder. We got to go with manslaughter. We got to figure out if we can win this case in court. But you charge 5 Black officers, instantly knock them off, and you charge them with murder. According to your logic, you're saying it's easy to get a conviction against Black officers in court, all house but no house. The institution of the police kill a Black man. And the Black men in uniform who kill the Black men, they themselves are victims of the racism that they have carried out against their own fellow Black man. want the police, them in Guyana, to take note. I want the police, them who kill black people in Guyana, to take note. People will throw you all under the bus. At a wink. Once the things start hitting the fan, they will throw you all under the bus. All you take notice. The old reggae tune, take one in. You better take one in. You better do good. I must remember that. Dr. Williams.
Yes, yes, I'm still with you. I wanted if you have the time to share a few observations. One,
Yes, please do.
I want to point out that we hope that in the case of IDPADA-G, that the government would not resort to unnecessary and useless delay tactics. And one reason why I think that the government, not I think, but I rather say that the government should not go down that road is you always look at who are the victims of a particular act or particular thing. Who is being who is affected by the conduct? In this case, in the IDPADA-G case, the people affected is not a set of people who run a IDPADA-G. People affected are Black people in Guyana, people of African descent, for that the United Nations and the government signed on to the decade, recognized the need to redress institutional and structural problems that affect those people, people of African descent. And so unnecessary delays in implementing the, the programs to achieve the goals of the decade is not affecting an organization called IDPADA-G. The real victims or the real people that will suffer as a result of the conduct of delay, suspension of the subvention, would be people of African descent. And that is an important point why I would urge that the government, if it is contemplating going down the road of delay tactics, would not. The other thing that I want to point out that uh, might be emerging was that there was an attempt by some African Guyanese group to join the action. The court didn't allow it. The court denied their application to join. And from their submissions, their intention was to join sort of in support or lining up with the the government. And the government seemed to be lending support to that small group of African Guyanese organizations that were trying to get into the mix, lending support to it. Here's the reason why that is troubling, I believe. That the decade is designed to remedy structural problems. One of the problems that people of African descent faced was always the ability to operate in a sort of a concerted way. And real progress is achieved when they're able to overcome the obstacles that seek to divide them and are able to work in a concerted way. And the decade for people of African descent in Guyana should not be characterized by disunity and division. And if anything, the government should not be stoking, should not be encouraging, and should not be furthering divisiveness within the African Guyanese community. In fact, the government should play the bigger role, right? A better role in seeking, even if there were some level of dissatisfaction, some level of disunity, to see how it could move towards a concerted action rather than create division within the community, or to use any sort of dissatisfaction or concerns it may have with the people who are running IDPADA-G to create greater division or some level of division among people of African descent within the decade. And I think that that's a development that was disturbing. And the court noted its concern that the matter really should have been resolved uh, even before it got to the court. And when matters of this nature are not resolved outside of the court system, it reflects the nature of our society, the unyielding sort of winner take all that we must win 100%, and the lack of political maturity to sometimes walk back even comments you make, things you say, position you take, in order to be able to reach some level of consensus. And we could only have inclusivity in the country if there's political maturity to be able to work through problems of, I would say, the minor nature of the IDPADA-G issue. And that is something that political maturity should have resolved before it got to the court. Now that it's in the court, the government has indicated in its paper the challenge it had in even coming up with a defense to the action should move swiftly rather than sort of holding its chest up and trying to create legal gymnastics to remedy this and to bring it to a quick end, not just simply for the sake of the people who run IDPADA-G, for the sake of people of African descent whose interest the government should play a major role in furthering rather than sort of destabilizing.
Well said here by Dr. Vivian Williams, who is one of the attorneys working on the case that IDPADA-G has brought against the government of Guyana. So he spent the last hour bringing us up to date with where that case is, what are some of the tactics the government is using, and we're going to fight. We're going to fight, and I want to thank Dr. Williams for coming on here tonight, but more than that, for signing on to this case, because we have a hard time these days finding lawyers to sign on to these kinds of cases. I remember in my time, when I was a young political activist, I always tell people I had two lawyers, pro bono, and that, you know, Peter Britton, who was a luminary, and Benji Gibson. You have lawyers who would volunteer to defend freedom fighters and to take up these cases, these human rights cases. We need more of our young lawyers to do that, and I want to thank Dr. Williams for stepping up and joining this case in our fight for decency, dignity, and justice in Guyana. Dr. Williams, thank you very much. Is there any burning thing that you want to say before we go?
I would just say, as I said before, I hope good sense prevail, and I hope that the government will take the takeaway for the government after the hearing last Wednesday, and that the takeaway from my discourse here tonight is we could do better than fight over small things, even when we have great differences and we are inclined to disagree, that there are some things we could agree on. In this case, with IDPADA-G and the support for people of African descent within the decade, taking into consideration the accrual of rights raised in the court, that the government should move swiftly to bring this case to an end. And if it is contemplating, it should set aside any thought of delayed tactics.
Attorney at law, Vivian Williams, Dr. Vivian Williams, thank you very much, my brother, for coming through tonight and helping us set this whole IDPADA-G Business in Perspective. Thank you very much. And thank you, our audience. Happy birthday to Dr. Rupert Rupnarain. Our condolences to the Roller family on the loss of scholar and intellectual Dr. Gordon Roller, the preeminent scholar on the Calypso in our Caribbean. He died in Trinidad and Tobago, where he has worked and lived for the last 40, 50 years. A contemporary of Dr. Rupert Rupnarain and Dr. Walter Rodney, he played an important role in part of my scholarship and teaching, which teaching of popular music as politics, and inspired by the work of Dr. Roller. I'm personally indebted to him, and I've met him several times at conferences in the Caribbean, and I was very glad that I got to meet him in person. And of course, Black Matters will debut this Friday, our Friday edition of Politics 101, our new program, Black Matters. Black Matters. We're not toning down. We're not toning down. Black Matters. Starting on Friday, same time, on this very channel. We'll talk Black people story. We're not going to mix it. No brandy and water. We're going for the full thing. No chaser. On the rocks. Straight. Black Matters. Starting on Friday. Of course, I'll be back here tomorrow night with more Politics 101. More Politics 101. Shout out again to my old neighbor, Mandy Rodriguez, here in PIM, Barbados, my old neighbor student. It's good after all these years, you know, to be catching up with you. And to all of you, my neighbors, my friends, my brothers and sisters, we're all in this thing together. We're all in this thing together. One day when freedom comes, we're going to say, we were there on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, on Friday, on Saturday, on Sunday, and Monday. We were in the front seat, making history, fighting for our rights, pushing back against dictatorship. Because we are human beings. We are human beings. Brother Bob says, we are what we are. And that's the way it's going to be. You can't educate her for no equal opportunity. Talking about my freedom. My freedom! Robert Nesta Marley, talking about my freedom. Freedom, my people, freedom.